Speaker, thanks very much. What I'd like to do is seek unanimous consent from the House to table a document that it's the voting record that shows the Liberal member for Avalon voting to scrap the failed carbon tax, voting with the Conservatives.
Is it agreed? I'm hearing a number of no's as well.
Mr. McDonald, Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this NDP Liberal coalition has driven demand for food banks to a 42-year high. The Liberal MP for Avalon said, "I've had people tell me they can't afford to buy groceries." CTV News has reported that a large number of people can't afford Thanksgiving dinner this year. For those people, especially, and this Prime Minister to them is not worth the cost. So, will he axe the carbon tax to lower prices, or will he break his promise to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians? Speaker, the Parliamentary Secretary should know better. And her 23 buddies from Atlantic Canada should know better, because they all voted against the motion to axe carbon tax that we put forward earlier this week. The lone holdout over there, the Liberal member for Avalon, said that everywhere he goes, people are losing faith in the Liberal Party. Yep. To lower food prices in a province like Newfoundland and Labrador, so dependent on fuel for shipping, carbon tax has to go. Yep. So will this Prime Minister axe the tax to lower prices for food in Newfoundland and Labrador, or will he break his promise?
And just so you know, it is tied to C-49 because they were using it as a bright, shiny object to try and distract from those failures. So what are those failures that they're using C-49 to try and distract from? I think they're best actually captured by the words of the member for Avalon. For those watching, the member for Avalon is a Liberal member of Parliament from Newfoundland. And on the show Power and Politics, he said this. Let me start with this quote. I think it's a great one. "I believe we have to change the way we're approaching climate change incentive," or whatever you want to call it. I think we're using the right now at this point in time is putting a bigger burden on people who are now struggling with an affordability crisis. That affordability crisis, of course, which Conservatives have been talking about for the last year, in which Liberal members of Parliament live in denial. The words of the Liberal member from Avalon, he goes on the program to say, "I think it's, the carbon tax, hurting them a fair bit," that being his constituents. "Everywhere I go, people come up to me and say, you know, we're losing faith in the Liberal Party. I've had people tell me they can't afford to buy groceries." The Liberal member from Avalon then went on to say they can't afford to heat their homes. And that's hard to hear from, especially seniors who live alone and tell me they go around their house in the spring and winter time with a blanket wrapped around them because they can't afford the home heating fuel. They can't afford to buy beef or chicken. We've been telling these Liberals that, but yet they're trying to use C-49 as a distraction from the day-to-day challenges they've caused Canadians. Now, he had obviously a private conversation, the Minister for Avalon, with the Minister of Finance, and around this time. And he said, "I told the Minister when she came to Newfoundland about this, and she told me, she said, I'm going to correct this." You're right. She actually said she's going to correct it. We're still waiting, yet not only do they break promises to Canadians, they break promises to their own backbenchers. The member for Avalon, the Liberal member for Avalon, went on and said, "We can't keep adding on to expenses." And David, that's the name of the host, "You know that everything in our province comes in by boat and truck, and they burn fuel, lots of it. And that's the cost to bring it in, and it's going to be added to every item that gets on a store shelf somewhere." So that is punishing anybody who goes to buy whether it's a chocolate bar or a tin of milk, anything, a piece or two of 2x4 will go up, which will make homes more expensive to build. You know what? I think our leader has been saying that for a year, and there have been nothing but deaf ears on the other side, apparently except for one fellow who now found religion after talking to his constituents for 3 months in the summer. That same Liberal member went on to say, I think they, being the Liberals, will lose seats, not just in Newfoundland, not just in Atlantic Canada, but indeed right across the country. If they don't get a grasp on this, the way that I think they should, it's interesting that he's calling his own party they, as if he's not part of them anymore, and hadn't voted 23 times before that for the carbon tax. Now on the 24th time, he's actually changed his mind and flip-flop. That's an unusual thing for a Liberal to flip-flop. But let me just remind you, he said, but get a grasp on this, the way they think they should. But this one is hitting home to everybody I speak to, and it's a grassroots issue. And if an election were called today, I'm not sure if the Liberal Party would actually form the government. I'm pretty sure that that wouldn't happen if an election were held today, that they wouldn't be in government. The hurt and pain that's been caused by these Liberals out there because of their inflationary deficits and their carbon tax is causing a great deal of hardship that's not recognized by 157 Liberal members and their cohorts in the NDP who support all of this, but the 158th one has finally got it. Maybe it'll take another 2 years for the other Liberals to get it. He goes on to say in the interview, again, you know, this is the counter to the bright, shiny distraction the Liberals were trying to do with Bill C-59 or 49 by trying to make some crazy accusations about who supports Atlantic Canadians. Apparently, according to the member from Avalon, Liberals don't support Atlantic Canadians. And he goes on to say, and I know the government is pushing people to switch over to heat pumps. We hear that all the time, including today, from the member for Central Nova. Heat pumps and whatnot. But many homes, especially the older homes, are not designed for that. They're not built to sustain the heat from a heat pump. So I don't think it works. And quite frankly, to show how out of touch the member from Central Nova is in his bright, shiny $10,000 heat pumps that he's pushing for all the companies that he knows and likes in Nova Scotia, the fact is, if you're living on CPP disability or a fixed income, you don't have $10,000 to lay out for a heat pump. But apparently, in the golden world that the Liberals live in, with $200,000 vacations for the Prime Minister, and the fancy world the member from Central Nova lives in with his chauffeured car as a minister, he thinks people on CPP, OAS, and GIS can afford $10,000 out of their cash flow for a heat pump. Their disconnection from reality knows no bounds. Finally, in that interview, this member goes on to say, in response to the issue of the messenger being the Minister of the Environment, who believes orange is a very nice color to wear, that member said from Avalon, no, he's not the right messenger. And because he's so entrenched in us, and I get it. I mean, where he came from and his whole idea of making a big difference in climate change, but you can't do it all overnight. You can't make it more expensive on people than what they can handle. And that's exactly what's happening here right now. The members from Atlantic Canada's request was that they actually increase the payments to people so that the revenue neutral, apparently, carbon tax, which they claim, would now actually cost more out of the Treasury. So their solution for cancer was to give us more cancer. It wasn't to actually say we're going to get at the root of the disease. And the root of the disease of the cost of this inflation is the carbon tax. That's what they should be getting rid of. So C-49, which they're trying to use as a distraction from this reality, includes a process to review renewable energy projects in the ocean. Well, I can inform this House that while NDP and Liberal government claims to support renewable energy projects in Atlantic Canada, the track record says that they actually don't do that. Over the decades, we've been trying in Nova Scotia to harness the enormous power of the Bay of Fundy tides to generate clean, renewable electricity. There have been about a half a dozen projects and hundreds of millions of private sector dollars and money trying to figure out how to harness the Bay of Fundy tides. And all but one project have failed. The one that failed, these are very large turbines. The ones that failed build these large turbines and put them on the floor of the Bay of Fundy. They're about 5 stories high, these turbines. But for those who don't know, the Bay of Fundy rises and falls every day by 52 feet. Twice each day, 160 billion tons of seawater flow in and out of the Bay of Fundy, more than the combined river flows of the world. The Bay of Fundy's tides transform the shorelines, tidal flats, and expose the sea bottom as they flood into the bay and its harbors and estuaries. It's estimated that by 2040, the tidal energy of the Bay of Fundy could contribute up to $1.7 billion to Nova Scotia's GDP and create up to 22,000 jobs. That's almost as many people as work in our #1 industry, the fishery. So how is that big as that besides the money in terms of energy? 300 megawatts of tidal energy can power a quarter of all Nova Scotia homes. That is just a fraction of the Bay of Fundy's 2,500 megawatt potential. That means Nova Scotia could become the net exporter of clean, renewable tidal power. So how are we doing on that? Every project, as I said, that has placed these turbines on the bottom ocean floor, within about 48 hours, they failed. The power of the tides have blown the turbines apart. But wait, an innovative company called Sustainable Marine Energy had a different idea. What if we float those turbines on the top of the water instead of sinking them to the ocean floor? Guess what? It worked. The first project to consistently put power into Nova Scotia's power grid and to be paid for that power by Nova Scotia Power was successful. The first turbines not to be destroyed by the power of the Bay of Fundy tides. So you think the NDP Liberal government would be thrilled that the approval of such a successful green renewable energy project would be fast-tracked. But that's not what happened. These Atlantic Liberals had the Department of Fisheries and Oceans refuse to extend the permit for further piloting of the project. They used DFO to kill the project, and that's important to Bill C-49 because of the power it gives DFO over all energy projects in Atlantic Canada. So those turbines are now out of the water. They are disassembled, the technology shelved, and the company bankrupt. Thank you, Atlantic Liberals, and your commitment to renewable energy from our oceans. Talk the talk, but walk away when it comes time to move forward. Typical of these Liberals, it's all about the input without any results. So this bill is not about approving projects in renewable ocean energy and oil and gas development to get the world off of coal and dirty dictator oil. No, it formalizes a process designed to make sure these projects never see the light of day. What we have is the NDP Liberals have done here in this bill is to put more gatekeepers in place to stop energy project development in Atlantic Canada. Why? Because they imported 4 sections from the disastrous Bill C-69, the No Pipeline Bill, into Bill C-49. With Bill C-69, the NDP Liberals have said more projects would get approved when they approve that. Well, how many have been approved? None. How many have been proposed? None. It magically drove all capital out of Canada for energy projects. Now, C-49 brings that process and that incredible success rate to Atlantic Canada's offshore energy projects. It imposes the same process, and imposing the same process will yield the same result. This bill triples the current timelines for approval of offshore energy projects. Currently, a decision by the Offshore Regulatory Board has 30 days for Cabinet to agree or disagree. They've extended that in this bill. Sections 28 and 137 give the federal Cabinet the ability to end offshore drilling and renewable energy projects. It also gives the Minister of Fisheries a veto to propose developments in areas if the minister says there may be a time in the future when there might be a marine protected area. Not there is a marine protected area. Maybe someday if I think there might be one, no, you can't go there. No, you can't go there. Sort of like whack-a-mole, and that's what DFO has been doing on land with the rivers and energy project, using the passage of one trout up a river as a reason to stop a project. Now they're giving that same power to DFO. And why is that possible? An MPA is a park in the ocean. Fish swim, they don't know the boundaries of the parks, but the Department of Fisheries and Oceans a few years ago met with the fishing groups in Nova Scotia and said, we're going to shut down 30% of the commercial fishery in Nova Scotia using MPAs. Work with us, and you can pick which fisheries we shut down. Don't work with us, and we'll pick what's on. They use their excessive power for other political purposes, and that's being imposed in this bill.
Absolutely.
This bill brings the inefficiencies of the federal government's Impact Assessment Act into this bill as well. It adds sections 61, 62, 169, and 170 of the IAA, where the federal minister has the power to impose conditions on authorizations. It also invokes Section 64 of the IAA, which allows the federal minister to interfere in a project if they think it's in the public interest and create any condition without limit they think is necessary, regardless of what the regulator decides. Adding these C-69 provisions to the Atlantic Canada's offshore energy project process extends the process through unlimited federal delays at any time. But at a minimum, it's going to be over 1,600 days. That's 4.5 years. That's the process that C-69 sets out. It's a minimum of 4.5 years for the approval of any project, and that really efficient process, which has led to no projects being approved in Western Canada, is now being imposed on Atlantic Canada. It's a recipe to end all our offshore energy projects in Newfoundland, Labrador, and Nova Scotia. Yeah. There are no provisions in this bill that require commercial fishing community to be at the table when all of these projects are being considered. And to date, there has been no consultation with the fishing industry about these projects. Why is that important? Because in Atlantic Canada, that's our largest industry. To not require their involvement when most of these projects impact their ability to earn a living is a betrayal by Atlantic Canada MPs to the critically important industry they propose or supposedly represent as members of Parliament, and to the tens of thousands of people that work on it. Finally, the current Atlantic Accord treats Nova Scotia and Newfoundland differently. The Nova Scotia government has the ability to designate areas under provincial jurisdiction as energy projects within the bays of the province, the jaws of the land as it's called. But Newfoundland and Labrador does not have that power. So I'm shocked, frankly, that they should really give their heads a shake, favorite saying of one of the MPs over there, that Newfoundland and Labrador Liberal MPs are okay with Nova Scotia having authorities that Newfoundland and Labrador government does not. But hey, what else would you expect from these silent Liberals? Well, silent except the member for Avalon, who apparently is not comfortable in his own caucus anymore. It's time for Atlantic Liberals to get their heads out of the sand. It's time for them to speak up and recognize that this bill does for Atlantic energy projects what C-69 did for energy projects in Western Canada. Atlantic Liberal MPs need to join us in fixing these issues in committee when we propose solid and thoughtful amendments to ensure the projects get done and not stopped by Liberal gatekeepers. It's also time for Liberal MPs to stop voting with the NDP Liberal government, I'm talking about the Atlantic Liberal MPs, to increase the cost of everything with their carbon tax. It's about time they do that. Well, this week they voted once again to impose a quadrupling of taxes on their own constituents. If they truly care about the economy, they will speak up for the region and axe the carbon tax. They will amend this bad bill so projects can actually get approved. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.